The wealthmanagement.com Advisor Innovations podcast is sponsored by LPL. As financial advice continues to evolve, LPL is at the forefront. Whether it's growing your RIA or building an independent practice, advisors can pick the business model, services, technology, and product mix that best meets their clients' needs. As a top wealth management firm 100% dedicated to advisor success, LPL looks forward to learning how they can help you build your tomorrow today. For information and show notes, go visit lpl.com/advisor innovation. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Advisor Innovations podcast. I'm David Armstrong. This is the podcast where we speak to the folks who are moving the financial advisory space forward. And today, I can't think of a better person to talk about that with than Brian Hamburger, the founder of Hamburger Law Firm and Marketcounsel. Brian, thanks very much for joining us.
David, thanks so much for inviting me.
So you, as the founder of Hamburger Law Firm and Marketcounsel, you guys were early on in the advisor transition game, the breakaway broker trend. We used to hear about it. Take a step back for folks who aren't familiar with you, if there is anyone out there who is not familiar with you in the space, and tell us a little bit about Marketcounsel and what you guys do there.
Oh, sure. Well, I'm sure there's plenty that are unfamiliar with the work that we do. One of the things I often hear, David, after a talk is someone will come up to me and say, I had no idea you did any of that stuff. So I'd be curious to know what people do think that I do. But about a little over 21 years ago now, I was sitting at a law firm, the first law firm job that I had out of law school, and as I continued to have dialogue with our clients, investment advisor clients, and friends that I've had throughout the industry, I recognized there was a common trait, and the common trait was that they didn't know what they didn't know, and they were suffering from these huge blind spots along the way. And so I guess with a certain degree of naivete, maybe a little bit of young brashness, I just said, I think I can solve for this. And so with a 6-month daughter in tow and a brand new mortgage on a first house and another child on its way, I set out to start both Marketcounsel and the Hamburger Law Firm in August of 2000. Really just working with advisors, small to mid-sized advisors who wanted some answers and didn't necessarily know the questions to ask. And we started with an outsourced regulatory compliance program that did more than just simply respond to their inquiries, but rather furnish them with proactive services based upon the information we collected up front. We complemented that with a law firm that was able to handle the related legal services, and we've been off to the races. I mean, it started out as a firm of me and my administrative assistant at the time has grown over the years, to occupy a space within our small industry that I'm really proud of. And we work with advisors now at all stages of their life cycle, whether it's someone who is exploring what independence is all about, someone who is launching a new firm or a team launching a new firm, all the way to managing ongoing regulatory compliance, working with them on a succession or continuity plan, and then eventually some sort of exit, whether it's a sale or otherwise. And it's work we're really, really excited to be able to wake up to each and every day and leave that impact on the space.
Were most of your early clients registered independent advisors, registered investment advisors, RIAs?
David, if you think back on the market at the time, right, so many were RIAs, but they were only RIAs ancillary to their independent broker-dealer practices, right? So virtually all of them were what we would now call hybrid RIAs. Back then, we didn't call them that, right? We didn't have electric vehicles, so we didn't grab that term hybrid yet, right. But they were fee plus commission guys, and working with them through the various conflicts of interest that weren't readily apparent to them at the time. But as they became more and more apparent, as it became a little more comfortable to talk about conflicts of interest, we found a lot more of those that were both fee and commission moving to a fee only practice over the years, and I think the market has done the same.
And so, when I first became aware of Marketcounsel, you were one of the first law firms that was giving legal assistance, counseling to advisory firms that saw an opportunity to get out from under the yoke of the Wall Street sales machine, right? I think we knew you as the firm that was helping wirehouse, what traditionally called wirehouse brokers, break away and start up their own registered investment advisory shop. Did that come around later?
No, really early on. I still remember working with our very first client who said they wanted to leave Merrill Lynch, and at the time, my focus was primarily on regulatory work. But as a young attorney, you tend to say, "Hey, I think we could help here." And it was a lot more work than I ever anticipated getting into this space. But I remember sitting down and having lunch with him and talking about why he wanted to leave Merrill Lynch. And he was so eloquent in the way he described it. He says, I harbor no ill will towards this firm that helped me launch my career. He said, it's just simply a matter of economics. He said, when I joined them, they invested heavily into me. He said, I would take that business card out of my wallet and I would hold it up, and it would open doors. Literally, people would ask, what was I thinking, or what my current thoughts were on different areas because of that mark on the card. He said, and slowly over time, both because of actions that the firm had undertaken and because of his development of his own career, he found that card was sitting in his pocket longer and longer. And he found that no longer was that card opening doors for him, but actually that card was sometimes hurting his chances of landing a new client or engaging in new dialogue. And he said that it was at that moment was an inflection point where he realized that the value that he was bringing exceeded that the firm was bringing, and he wanted to go independent. And that conversation resonates with me all the time because I'm working with individuals and teams who have spent 20, 30, sometimes 40 years at renowned financial institutions and organizations that have had just an outsized brand and have made a huge impact within the securities industry and on the lives of so many Americans. So many of the advisors we speak to really recount the same type of story, which is that they're at the point in their careers where they don't need that brand to establish credibility, that the credibility, if anything, may be watered down or diminished by that brand. And so that is that practice, the work of helping advisors who are in the wirehouse or bank or trust company channel and helping them make their way out of captive employment and over to independence is a huge component of what we do. Sometimes it's what we did in the past, which is move them to their own firm. But more and more, we're doing that as an integrated component of existing firms in the independent space who are looking to recruit into that space. So no longer is it just a decision of, okay, you're leaving, we're going to set you up with a brand new firm. That certainly is the case much of the time. But more and more, we're seeing existing firms play a role, which is which is creating an amazing array of options now for those looking to go independent, but not necessarily go out on their own.
When you say existing firms, we're talking about this new crop of aggregators, whatever you want to call them, tuck-ins, roll-ins, acquirers, this on the independent side. That are becoming larger and larger, in some cases, national institutions that can compete in their own right. Is that what we're talking about?
Absolutely. And I think, but by your inability to really, put one word on them, I think we articulated some of the confusion that we've created within the space. So back in the day, it really wasn't an option, right? It was, I'm leaving the firm and I'm starting my own firm, right? That was the single lane road that we had over to independence. Now we've got about an 8-lane highway to independence, much like the New Jersey Turnpike, right? It's not terribly well marked, right? The signage is a little off, and we might be missing some mile markers along the way because people don't understand the abundance of options that they have when moving over to independence. Sure, they could still set up their own firm, and we are huge fans of those that decide to go what we call fully independent, right? Creating their own firm, creating their own destiny, identifying what architecture they want to support. But there are plenty of existing independent firms that are already in the space that have built a value proposition around recruiting new talent. There are aggregators in the space who are helping firms with the launch and then acquiring their interest. There are platforms in the space that are doing an amazing job at assist firms in moving over to independence without having to do it completely on their own. There's an abundance of options, and that array has continued to make independent wealth management just such an enticing option for so many financial advisors, regardless of where they currently sit.
Yeah. And do you think, we've never had this conversation before, but do you think that the wirehouses or the traditional Wall Street, product distribution firms, the Merrill Lynch's, Wells Fargo's, Morgan Stanley's of the world, clearly they're not sitting around just watching this happen, right? They're evolving and changing themselves and moving more towards the planning side as well. But do you think that their traditional insistence on such heavy product sales kind of environment is what fueled a lot of the growth of the RIA space?
I do. I think there's so many embedded conflicts of interest in firms that want to be vertically integrated, right? So you've got these wirehouses that want to house everything from the products that you mentioned to the trading, to the custody, to the cash products that that are sitting ancillary to the other investment products. They want to include even more. They want to include banking and lending services, and so as a result, advice ends up taking a backseat to the product sales. And I think that I used to say, don't count these firms out, right? There's a lot of really smart people at these firms, and they're going to figure out how to counter the independent movement. But I'm not so sure that that's my that I feel that conviction anymore. Really? I think that they have looked to profitability over all else. I think they're they say, well, if we could sell this product and we can manage compensation structure for advisors that perform at a certain level, we can run a very profitable company. And it doesn't always have to be about headcount. It doesn't have to be just about growth. And so I really think that these firms are looking at profitability over all else. And while I don't have any clear evidence to back up this statement, I honestly do believe that they have ceded the ground to the larger, more sophisticated advisors, recognizing that they can't ever create an environment of open architecture that'll satiate the appetite of these advisors because of the myriad of conflicts that they have and the burden that supervision would be for those types of practices. And so it just is becoming a natural arc in the career of a successful financial advisor that after spending a significant amount of time within one of these firms, that they just have to pick up their chips and move on to a different structure, one that gives them greater capabilities.
One of the things when I first started looking at this, and you helped me understand a lot of this early on, is the lengths to which a lot of these vertically integrated wirehouse, for lack of a better word, firms would go to keep their advisors inside the corral, inside the fence. Tactics like marking up an advisor's, regulatory U4 form just before they walk out the door, or just various ways that they've made it really difficult for this to happen. Tell me a little bit about that. What was the reaction of these firms when this RIA movement first, really started taking off?
Well, going back to when this really started to happen, we didn't have anything like the broker protocol. So, it was very much the Wild West, right, where folks would leave, advisors would leave on a Friday afternoon. We would schedule it for around 4 or 4:30 in the afternoon. And we only scheduled it for 4 or 4:30 because it reduced the likelihood that their, at the time, prior employer would be successful getting in front of a judge to successfully get a temporary restraining order. We knew that we would at least have the weekend to communicate with clients, and firms would just continue to ratchet up their tactics. They have increased their surveillance of advisor activities. I mean, everything is now data driven, right? Because technology can often detect what people can't, whether it's aberrations in print jobs or changes to someone's schedule in visiting the office, or documents that the person looks at within their corporate network infrastructure. So surveillance has increased substantially. The days of the TRO were all but gone, but have really made a comeback over the last couple of years, primarily under the name not of restrictive covenants, which was the basis that they used to go in under, but on client privacy and data security. And and by the way, that's a much more altruistic argument for firms to go into court with, where they're saying, hey, we're not here to restrict an advisor from leaving. We're here to restrict them from stealing this customer data, right? That's kind of the argument that they're.
It sounds a lot better anyway.
Yeah, it sounds much better. They make for a far more sympathetic litigant, and certainly gives us our work to go and encounter those types of arguments. So those tactics continue. We continue to have firms who are delaying or marking up people's CRD records in a U5 on the way out the door. We're having firms do their best to sully the reputation of advisors that are leaving. We've had them construct any sort of lie about the advisor, gambling and drug problems, family problems, really anything to cast aspersion on a financial advisor's ability to continue to be a trusted advisor and service their clients. And so the best we can do to counter is to have a well-planned transition. And so we'll work with advisors, depending upon the sophistication, anywhere from 3 to 12 months ahead of their eventual departure. We'll work with them on the entire plan, everything from what their needs, goals, and objectives are, their tolerance for risk. We've got advisors who are leaving who say, I can't sustain a lawsuit. I wouldn't be able to sleep at night, or my family wouldn't talk to me. And so we've got to take that into consideration, right? There are some transitions we have to be far more conservative on than others. We often have to proceed on every transition with backup plans, right? Plan B and Plan C are standard when we are working through these transitions. And well-planned transitions are really elegant. Plan B and Plan C never see the light of day. In hindsight, they look like a total waste of time and money, but they are what allows Plan A to work so flawlessly. We're really excited. I'll tell you, the transition work is the component of our work that allows for us to really have a lot of energy and adrenaline that pumps through our office on a weekly basis. I mean, we're constantly talking about imminent launches and business launches and employment transitions. And how do you not get excited about that story, right? How do you not get excited about the launch of new businesses to support the American economy and just the entrepreneurial dreams of people who have worked at these institutions for so long, and now are about to really take that destiny into their own hands. It's really exciting.
Particularly in an adversarial kind of situation, right? I mean, if there's the person who's trying to keep that from happening. So we did have the broker protocol there for years, which was put in place that kind of, from what I understand, was a bit of a ceasefire amongst these wirehouse firms when advisors were jumping from wirehouse to wirehouse. And instead of just engaging in a bunch of lawsuits back and forth, they decided, okay, there's a certain amount of information you can take as an advisor to this other firm, and we won't sue you. And in return, coming the other way, you're not going to sue us. That seemed to put a sort of a bit of grease under the wheels of advisors transitioning. That's gone away largely. A lot of firms have dropped out of this broker protocol. Does that make your work harder, or at least does it give you more work?
So it's interesting because I think it's been a component, but it hasn't been as big of a component as I think people have given it credit for. The broker protocol, it didn't change everything, but it did change people's perception. And I think that I think it did a lot of good in the space because it did alleviate people's restrictions that they had that were stemming out of restrictive covenant. But it didn't give them a get out of jail free card, right? It wasn't a carte blanche to leave the firm and do whatever you want to do, right? The broker protocol was very prescriptive in terms of here is the protocol that you need to follow. Here's the eligibility criteria, and here's what you can then do. And people kind of skipped that part. I think too many people looked at the broker protocol the way my kids used to look at any type of condition, right? I used to say, well, if you clean your room, we'll go for ice cream tonight. And I can tell you, I would get home from work and they didn't hear if you clean my room part. All they heard was we're going for ice cream tonight. And so I think advisors fell into that same trap where they heard, oh, so I can get out of here and the firm can't hold me responsible for these restrictive covenants. They missed the other part, right? They missed the part, the limitations on joint ownership of the book, or they missed, the limitations on maybe the way in which their book was segregated between the brokerage firm and the bank, or how the firm tried to cull their participation or limit their participation in the broker protocol. They tended to skip the details. So I think the fact that we have some more potholes on that road to independence might not be a terrible thing, in that people are now asking the questions. They're not just assuming that they are subject to that type of protection. And that's a good thing. Listen, there's no indentured servitude here. No one has to continue to work at a place where they're currently working. The question is, how do they leave and what can they do once they leave? And so those are really worthwhile questions to have answered. And so I think the fact that it's not so black and white, it's not so cut and dry, allows people to pause and to consider the risks that are inherent in such a transaction. Risk is not a dirty word, right? Advisors deal with risk all the time. It's a critical component of building and constructing a portfolio. Strange, though, that when they become business owners, they often don't want to anticipate or talk about the risk. And I think it's a good conversation to have early on in terms of here's the risks we're going to assume, here's the ones that we're going to mitigate, and here's why we're doing it this way, because they become far more intelligent about the choices that they're making, very much like one of their clients would be on a discussion about portfolio construction, right? Advisors tend to crave for an engaged client, someone who really wants to know the why. And that's the position we sit in, right? We want advisors to really care as to why we're making some strategic decisions in connection with their move, which may make their move look different than that of their colleague just a few years ago, right? And there's reasons for that.
Yeah. I don't want to dwell on the transition thing too long, but it is fascinating to me. It all comes down to who owns the client relationship, right? And this is where the kind of the captured advisor, the firm thinks that they own the client relationship. The advisor really kind of in reality owns the advisor or the client relationship. And when they leave, the question of when they can solicit those clients to come over with them. And that's where the kind of the heart of the contention is, right? Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, it may be even a little more than that, David, because, I think it does start with ownership of the client. And, legally, in most circumstances, on the cases we're talking about, the firm owns the client. From a legal perspective, they have ownership over that relationship. That said, practically speaking, the advisor owns the trust component of the relationship, which is the most valuable component in that relationship. And then if we zoom out even further, the reality is that no one owns the client, right? The client can go anywhere they choose to go. And so I think that's what creates so much of the confusion. Restrictive covenants is definitely a big component, right? The non-solicitation, the non-competes, and other types of restrictions. Those are certainly big issues, but there's others, right? And the other issues are in the areas of confidentiality and trade secrets and privacy and data security, right? Because even if an advisor has the ability to solicit, do they have their hands on the data that they need in order to properly service that client without without interruption. So it does become a bit of a complex web that we weave. And it's why that, on every one of these transitions, regardless of our perceived threat level, on every one of these transitions, we're going to sit down and we're going to draft a written plan that identifies, puts all these issues into a document, and identifies how we're going to handle them. So that way anyone can go back during this whole, at any point in the process, even if it's in the middle of the night, when they say, well, how are we dealing with this? They can look and they can see, oh, here's how we're dealing with it. And here's why we decided to deal with it that way. And if we need to revisit it, we can. But it all centers around that written plan to transition to another firm.
Yeah. So beyond the transition work what you guys are doing, you're also doing a lot of, you say, outsource compliance work for independent firms. And, there's been obviously big changes in the regulatory world here. What are you seeing now as advisors' biggest challenges when it comes to facing either the SEC or FINRA? What are they most surprised about? What are they least prepared for? What are the biggest issues that they need to understand when dealing with the current regulatory environment?
The current regulatory environment is an interesting one. We're continuing to reel from Reg BI, and there seems that we have an SEC that is receptive to making some substantial changes to the way that the prior administration had addressed that. And so more to come on whether the SEC will be looking to make radical changes, but they have continued with regulatory developments. And this is after many, many years of not really doing anything. So I think the industry is pleased to see a regulator once again assuming the reins and furnishing it with regulation ahead of headline risk, ahead of politicians identifying this as an issue. It's good to see regulatory development again. I don't think that we are where we were 20 years ago, where people are just simply confused about new developments in regulation. There's a lot of sources out there. I think what people are confused by is there's so many information sources. They don't know how it necessarily applies to them. So when we dive in deep and we start working with an existing firm who's been in business for some time, and they say, we need help on managing our regulatory compliance, I think it's most surprising to them that everything is a process in a strong compliance program, that everything is documented. I think they're surprised that just because there's not a rule that they still have to do something. It's this whole principles-based regulation that the SEC really talks about for RIAs, as opposed to rules-based regulation that we see FINRA utilizing for broker dealers. The rules-based regulation is pretty easy for people to wrap their head around, right? There's a rule and this is what I need to do. And in addition to the rule, I'll follow the interpretive guidance. But the principles-based makes it a little more difficult because people then interpret it in different ways. And so I think that's been some of the biggest challenge. I think there's also been a lot of relatively new pressure within the RIA space to be more than a fee-only investment advisor, to engage in practices that are not traditional to the fee-only RIA space, which isn't necessarily a problem in and of itself. It's just that these practices require an assessment of conflicts of interest and whether they're properly disclosed and whether they're proper to begin with. And then if they are proper, whether they're properly disclosed and whether clients are really understanding that disclosure and signing off on the appropriate agreements. I think the business and the technology associated with the RIA practices are advancing at such hyper speed that it's been hard for regulators to keep up. But in a principles-based world, they don't really have to keep up, right? Because they still get to regulate utilizing 2020 hindsight. Right. So it really is imperative for advisors to modify their practices to all of these new issues that you guys are writing about, each and every day.
Well, tell me about that. You said that there's pressure on the advisor to move beyond just the fee-only construction that traditionally they've had. What kind of pressures are those? Pressures to sell product? Pressures to also give their clients insurance? What kind of pressures are we talking about?
Well, the secret is out that advisors serve a role often as their client's most trusted advisor, and so because of that, they are very lucrative distribution points. And whether that's distribution for insurance, estate planning services, accounting services, private investments, alternatives, you name it across the board. Everyone seems to have figured out that RIAs are a wonderful point of distribution. It's not a big stretch for RIAs to say, well, how do I then participate in this additional work that we're doing? How do we either put a fee structure around it? How do we receive a referral fee or a portion of these fees? And every time we do that, it creates conflicts of interest. On top of that, we have new entrants into the space. We have a lot of new money that is flowing into the space. That's private equity money. That's money from venture capital firms, money from asset managers that are looking to invest in RIAs. And every one of those investments carries with it an opportunity, or really a burden, to look at the conflicts of interest that it creates, if it does create any. And I think a lot of firms are trying to diagnose that themselves. It's kind of like if I just, had a pain and just tried to figure it out for myself instead of going to a doctor. I mean, it's not that they're not skilled at looking at things like conflicts of interest. It's just that they're most likely jaded by their own self-interest, right? So it's hard knowing that they wouldn't do anything to purposely harm one of their clients. It's hard for them to evaluate whether one of their practices is truly a conflict of interest. And so that's often a role that we're playing with so many of these advisors as they are growing and getting into these new areas and becoming more sophisticated. The question becomes, are any of these components creating new conflicts of interest that we need to separately address?
So if I'm hearing you right, a lot of these new networks that are coming around of RIA firms, be it the Focuses, the Dynasties, the Hightowers, whatever they are, a lot of times they will say, okay, we're going to either acquire or have a partnership with this particular RIA because they bring a certain skill in, say, accounting, or they bring a certain skill in estate planning. And that we can sort of plug into our larger network and begin to refer all these other advisors or clients of these other advisory teams that were also part of the network over to them to grow out our service offering. You're saying there is where the conflicts are beginning to arise?
Well, I mean, that's a pretty vanilla one, right? That's pretty easy. And that could be a conflict of interest. Certainly, if an advisor is making a recommendation to a service provider, and the primary basis upon which they're making that recommendation is that they are going to receive a portion of that fee, either directly or indirectly. Directly is easy. Indirectly would be because that service provider is part of the same affiliation group, and indirectly the profits flow up to a holdco or some type of unified company where the advisor also has an interest. Yep. Then that creates a conflict of interest, of course. But these are becoming much more complicated than that, right? That's a pretty easy one, right? But what do you do when you're sitting as a portfolio company within as one of the investments of a venture capital firm, or private equity rather, and another portfolio company is someone you want to collaborate with on a project, right? It creates conflicts of interest. And so a conflict of interest for an advisor is a problem in an objective sense. It's not a problem in a bad sense. It's a problem meaning that, okay, well, we need to now solve for that problem, right? Like a math problem, right? It's not a bad thing. It's just something we can't ignore, right? And so we need to solve for that problem. We need to take a look at, okay, what does this business relationship look like? Who benefits from it? Are there other options that might be in the best interest of clients? And if we're limiting that choice, we need to make sure that we're properly disclosing why we're limiting that choice, and really, what's in it for the advisor and what the client's other choices may be.
It just strikes me that a lot of these outside money coming into the space of private equity, venture capital, even asset management firms, as you say, still don't always really understand the RIA space. And
I agree.
they don't get that you can't just drop some money and incentivize folks to act the way you want them to act.
Yeah, we're unfortunately, one of the fastest growing trends that we are dealing with are people that have entered into business transactions over the last several years who want out. And it's buyers and sellers. So it's just missed expectations. And the most recent one I was dealing with is a small asset management company who acquired an RIA and have been dumbfounded as to why they haven't been able to utilize that RIA's advisors to distribute their product. And quite frankly, it was just a complete misunderstanding of what an RIA was. I know it sounds very basic to you and I who live in this space, but it was a real misunderstanding of what an RIA was, and that the fact that these advisors are fiercely independent, they treasure their objectivity, and the fact that they were owned at a minority basis by this asset management company was not in and of itself going to convince these advisors to distribute affiliated product. And in fact, speaking with many of the advisors, they specifically avoided the affiliated product because they didn't want their clients to ask them about a potential conflict of interest. So if there was an equal product with another unaffiliated provider, then they would select that one. So it's really interesting what's going on right now in the space. I think that there's been a lot of money that has come into the space in a very short period of time, and we'll see where everything levels out in terms of watermark. But these valuations that we're seeing are not sustainable in a normal economic model, right? Those valuations suggest to you that there are other issues at play. And I think that, the most significant issue that's at play is that these acquirers think that they can run a more profitable business than the founders. I think that's one of the most critical issues that's driving up the value of these businesses. And I think it's largely on the thesis that they can distribute additional product, not pare down expenses all that significantly. I could be wrong, but in speaking to a lot of acquirers, it seems to be what's driving them of late.
Hey, also asset managers getting into the robo advisory game, buying up those platforms as well, seems to think that if you're an asset manager, you're really looking for distribution. That's what you do.
Well, you're realizing that it's probably not long that you're going to distinguish yourself with by your investment selection, right? Because so much of that is becoming automated and run off of formulas and data. You're probably not going to distinguish yourself in fees, right? Because there's been such fee compression within the asset management space. And so I think asset managers are left with, really one piece of that formula, which is we need to have the best distribution around. And I think that's what has them looking at all these new areas.
That's fascinating. Your passion and understanding of the independent advisory space comes, yes, from your early work in the law firm, but your father was an advisor, correct?
He was, yeah. He became an advisor by way of financial planning. Mm-hmm. So kind of made his way from actually insurance sales over to financial planning, and was an independent at an independent broker dealer. And then he ran a large OSJ at that independent broker dealer and created a hybrid practice. So had an RIA, and so I got to see his struggles along the way. I got to sit in on his study groups and hear from a lot of his friends and colleagues as I was, in college and even high school, and hear some of the things that they were frustrated with, not just in the area of RIA regulatory compliance, but also in the area of broker-dealer regulatory compliance. But more important than all that, just as small business owners, right? They simply didn't know what they didn't know. They, going back to what we talked about early on, they were just frustrated that, it just seemed like an endless array of issues that were coming at them. And I just thought there was a way for us to capture all that and deliver this on a more measured curriculum so that they didn't feel like they were drinking from a fire hose all the time.
Yet you didn't want to join the advisory firm.
No, I don't think that that's where I can really make an impact. There's so many great advisors out there, and I knew it then, and I know it even more now. I mean, there are, advisors are truly gifted with such a high degree of client empathy, an amazing amount of patience, balanced with strong analytics. And when I think of the real core value proposition of an advisor, right, sitting around a proverbial dining room table with a family and helping them grapple not just with the family's most significant financial challenges, but with the family's most significant challenges, right? I think that takes a really special type of individual, and I applaud the work of great financial advisors. I think that they sit a lot as great lawyers, right? Everyone likes to throw shade at financial advisors or lawyers, but everyone loves theirs, right? It's a very strange dynamic. But I think great financial advisors are just doing unbelievable work.
Yeah, well, and I know that many of them appreciate what you do too. So, Brian, we're at the top of the hour. I know I can't keep you longer than that. So, thanks very much for taking the time to do this with us.
It's always a pleasure to sit down and talk shop with you, David. Thanks so much for having me.
And you've been listening to the Advisors Innovation Podcast. This is David Armstrong. Thank you very much.
This podcast is sponsored by LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor and member FINRA SIPC. LPL Financial is a separate entity from and not affiliated with wealthmanagement.com.